Ruto. Na ameinua mikono, hakuna kitu wako nayo. Hiyo ni nini? Hata polisi wafanye kitu poa. Wafanye kitu inafaa. Na kama hivyo ndio tutatokea, si wasasi wote watuue. Kama wanataka kutuua, tufanye hivi wenye wanataka.
Welcome to the Bold Analysis. My name is Frank. Well, after yesterday's protests that seemed to only have been having an impact in Nairobi city alone and some areas around Karatina, then there have been calls from some quarters of the population and from some leaders on the need to cease the fire on the protests and give the government time to work and deliver, mainly because a few individuals who share the same political ideologies with those who are calling such shots have been given the opportunity to work in government, majorly as cabinet secretaries. Some have even gone to the extent of claiming that the protests have been hijacked by criminal commercial activists. This is majorly due to sustained government propaganda agenda to sanitize the force and brutality that they've met on peaceful protesters around the country. And if so, the element of criminal activists or criminal commercial activists, if it is so there, then I believe that the country has systems and a system of judiciary that can deal with the same cases or claims. The demonstrations that were in the country were meant to call for attention to certain issues, and therefore the call for attention or the address to certain issues that were bewildering Kenya, there is no failure in the demonstrations and there is no crime in doing demonstrations or picketing as enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya 2010. You know, for a moment, the moment we start now calling the calls that we should now give executive time to deliver on its mandate, we should now call it off, that these efforts are not going anywhere, that is where we start to fail and start walking backwards as a nation. The moment we start embracing and praising the executive as an arm of the government, then that is where we fail, because we are the governed. And there is no instance, I believe, that as the governed, every time the executive shall or will always be concerned about our welfares in totality without having its excesses. And when you see the people get their responsibility or mandate and come out on the streets to protest, then it means that institutions that have been established to stand for the people or to represent the people in opposing some of the excesses or doing the checks and balances to the government have failed. A case in point is the case of Kenya, where the opposition did fail the citizens in the first instance, and that is when they decided that as a youth of this country, they were going to come out and speak about the excesses or the unchecks or the imbalances that the government posted on them. But then in all this, one thing or one issue has come out clearly as a hindrance block to all this. The party political ideologies of deceit and conmanship are some of the elements that have dragged Kenya historically to this date in its bid to try to achieve some of its liberational ideas or struggles that the people have always presented. Because when a particular course or action is taken, then a political or few political leaders come and hijack these moves in a way, sinister way, and then the people are rendered, therefore, as people who are useless or people who don't know what they are adjudicating for. That one did come out clearly in the recent wake of the protests that we've been witnessing in this country. And the idea of the subscription to political party ideologies is not just to be blamed on the recent hijacking. You even saw in the run-up to the 2022 general elections when some few individuals were otherwise mesmerized by certain individuals, and certain individuals that they just had a general hate for without necessarily knowing why they hate them. They decided to just throw their votes for the sake of our community or certain group of people don't, or historically don't vote or don't stand for the ideologies of certain people. Well, that is a democratic right, that is a constitutional right, that is a freedom of expression of your right by the ballot. But then, how far is the benefit of your right, or is it going to be to the advantage in the running of the affairs of this country? And on this, I agree with one, Ledama Kina. Let's listen to Ledama Kina.
The moment we now start praising the executive is the moment we fail. No wonder, Mr. Speaker, today, if you go on social media, you will find two lawyers who Senator Sifuna said is going to give direct tickets to be able to run for office, opining, their negative views of the Senate. They are saying we've become sort of like flower girls and boys for the executive. I want to remind us that we are here to check the executive. We're not here to start saying, oh, thank you, President, for swearing in our colleagues from our political party. Let us be reminded that we are here as Parliament to be able to oversight the executive. We are not here to become an extension of the executive. I completely detest that, Mr. Speaker. And I want to remind my dear sister that we respect the separation of powers. I'm in this house to ensure that we respect the rule of law and the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, when I was sitting here, and I'm going to now deviate from advising my sister, I sat here and I received a supplementary order paper. And in the supplementary order paper, order number 8, Mr. Speaker, talks about amending the division of revenue. Mr. Speaker, I've been in this Senate for the last 7 years or so. And by the time we pass the division of revenue, there is a process. We start with...
Just brought it out clearly that we the people, or in that case, the Parliament or the National Assembly or the Senate has a mandate, and especially the opposition, to overcheck or to check on the balances, on the checks and balances and on the performance of the government, and not be a cheering squad to whatever decision is taken. That is politics of populism, and that is what has been a problem to Kenya, because we believe that we are going as a group. Whether the group is leading people to a pitfall that people will never come out of in the near future. Then, we are not special as a country, because when we say that we need to call off the protests, we need to give the government time to function, when in the first 2 years that they've been given that time, then they only had more wrongs, that they pushed them also to make some concessions on certain decisions, key among them the rejection of the Finance Bill 2024, the dismissal of the first cabinet, and then reinstatement of some sections of the cabinet together with the new fellow ones. Therefore, in that event, the demonstrations paid off. Therefore, the call to dismiss these demonstrations are just like Panadol prescriptions that we are trying to give to this country, when indeed we have serious socio, political, and economic issues that are bewildering to this country. I was following up on the news gang yesterday night, and there are some sentiments from Yvonne Okwara that I believe are sending certain message to the ruling political elite in this country.
Over the years, some Kenyans have developed some sense of exceptionalism. It could never happen here, we say. Could never be us. And perhaps this is also a stance adopted by our leaders. That is why it would seem they have moved on from the events of the last 2 months or so. But we are not special. What is happening elsewhere could very well easily happen here. When protesters burned down parliament in Burkina Faso 10 years ago in 2014, I doubt that anyone there could have anticipated that event that changed the country's future. You see, the people went out on the street because of the president's attempt to remove constitutional term limits. Burkina Faso, just like Kenya, had been known as a relatively stable country economically. The protesters there termed it a constitutional coup, urging the leaders to follow the constitution. Does that sound familiar? Okay, let's talk about Sri Lanka now, in 2022, where protests broke out precipitated by an economic crisis. Inflation, cost of living, and cost of food and fuel products were at the heart of the protests. Members of cabinet resigned. The president told the nation that the protests had been infiltrated by extremist forces. Sounds similar? And then there is Bangladesh. Now, international media termed the protest there as a Gen Z revolution, a protest triggered by civil service quotas, which became much bigger in the end. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, even after surviving previous protests, surprisingly resigned and fled the country with some members of her family. An associate professor of government from Cornell University, Sabrina Karim, said, and I quote, "It might very well be the first ever successful Gen Z-led revolution." Why am I highlighting these examples? Well, I'm no fearmonger, but the similarities exist. What is happening in Kenya is not unique. The issues facing the young people, and indeed entire populations here, are no different from around the world. The economy, unemployment, cost of living are as much a concern here as anywhere else. The lesson? Ignore these issues and the people at your own peril. And our leaders would do well to watch and learn. So as they seemingly move on and claim to have solved the problem with all manner of terms such as inclusive and broad-based government, the one question they need to keep asking themselves is, have they really solved the problem? Even if they claim that the more recent protests have not been as prominent as they were in June, the question is, do the young people feel like their needs have been addressed? The people express their views, and when they don't feel heard, they will find a way to make themselves heard. And the echo chamber that politicians and leaders continue to create for themselves, where they are their own biggest cheerleaders, is no longer tenable. You see, leadership is a social contract to the people, and the people know it. The more aware they are of this, the more difficult it becomes for government to do things its own way. Leaders with deaf ears are facing extinction. Citizens are more demanding, more enlightened. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Burkina Faso all learned this the hard way. If we ignore June 25th and the events before and after that, then Kenya could very easily be headed the same way.
That something also comes out that we must respect the separation of powers, and we must give due independence to the commissioner authorities or the independent commissional authorities that are established by the constitution, and we need to give independence to the various arms of government, and above all have a respect to the rule of law. We cannot purport to be trying to throw abysses or throw stones or criticism or leveling criticisms at certain people who took the bold initiative to come out to speak for the masses who are either afraid to speak. Whatever the actions that the youth of this country took that saw the dismissal of the Finance Bill 2024, the dismissal of the cabinet sent some message. And then that message is not just only useful for this year, but it will be more useful to even to successive regimes that will come. Because at least they'll be basing their reasoning that at one point there is a regime or an administration that was once in power and didn't act as per the calls of the governed, and they found themselves in a certain situation due to the anger of the people of the country. Then from there, what is coming out in summary of all this is that, for one, I saw today William Ruto was on a tour of Murang'a County, where he went for his usual opening of small projects at the last mile connectivity. The other day was in Embu, launching water projects and irrigation schemes. Well, those are some of the roles that maybe Kenyans expect from him. But then there are questions that are lingering on to what extent, or what is the velocity, or what is the amount of, or what is the largeness or bigness of some of the projects that he should launch. Because sincerely, seeing a whole commander-in-chief of the armed forces stand to launch maybe something like a transformer, or stand to launch something like a water tap in an area, then it depicts some level of laziness maybe within our governance apparatus and systems. So in summary, what is still coming out is that, for one, the recent political tensions that have managed to go to some level of calmness have enabled the president to transfer baggage, and that is to transfer baggage to some of the key people that he invited to the government. Remember, he gave the opposition some of the critical ministries in this country, key among them the Ministry of Treasury. And that is where the pressure was coming from in the first instance. And therefore, by an act of transferring that baggage to the opposition, he can clearly now go back to his campaign agenda and say that I've now given them the opportunity to also equally offer to Kenyans what they would have otherwise offered would they have won the 2022 general elections, or in the event that they can win or they can come to contest against me come 2027. And that is why he has now found it rather quite easy to be back to what he does best, and that is on top of cars in the name of development tours around Kenya. Number two, the feeling that the revolt is over is not true. And that is a blatant lie that we continue to shroud ourselves in. Because, yes, we might have been successful in trying to contain the public rage and anger that was portrayed by the Gen Zs. But then I tend to feel that the issues that they raised, some of them having been partially addressed, and key among them bordering areas such as use of excessive force by the police, the brutality, corruption, the unemployment, and the other system rots that we have in this country that have not been addressed, are likely to come up more like a hurricane or in a tornado-like force that is waiting to beckon, and not unless those in power work hard to avert the system rot, then we are likely to be back to the situation that we found ourselves in on the fateful day of June 25th, 2024. It might not be now, It might not be 2 years from now. It might not be 10 years from now. But then, basing on Yvonne Okwara's sentiments, you can reason together with me that if the issues are not addressed, then sometimes back we are likely possible to find ourselves in a similar situation. Well, I've heard people also saying that 2027 now is the magic moment at the ballot, especially for the Gen Zs who should now use the 2027 election platform to communicate their grievances. Well, that is right. That it is right to reason that way. But then there are questions that are lingering. That what happens in the event that issues such as key issues such as around the reforms that are so much needed at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission are not addressed. And then 2027, even those who are telling the Gen Zs to come down, come back to lament that kumeibwa, ama kumeibwa. What will be the end of all that? Then it means that we are just trying to postpone our problems and therefore engaging in a circus play of entertaining the injustices that are being perpetrated by the elite ruling class against the citizens of the country. The fourth summary on all this, you know that change in a country is initially resisted by a majority, especially the comfortable generations or populations within a country. However, for the few focused individuals who remain focused to the core, they are able to move forward and crystallize on the opportunities and then realize a change within the country. Thank you for watching. That marks the end of our analysis.